Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, cranking up the live stream in the wee hours of Thursday night, Friday morning for you, the college football fan. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for the very best in college football coverage. We are here 24/7, 365. We post videos each and every day of the year, even during the TED time, which is for the most part in May and June, but also you could consider right now kind of the dead time. But college football spring practices crank up across the nation this week. And we've got college football all over the place and will very soon with the spring games culminating in April. So we thank you for making all this possible as your comments, your support, your likes, your comments, your questions, and your feedback, and of course your views and subscriptions keep this going, keep me going, and I appreciate it. Even the negative comments keep me going, as long as they're legitimate football comments and debate and discussion and arguments. I love it. So subscribe to my YouTube channel. Once again, I can't imagine that you're going to find more quality college football content than you find right here. Just in the last few days, we have heard from some of the best bloggers and broadcasters, from Peter Burns of the SEC Network and ESPN, Ohio State coverage, LSU, a great discussion with Matt Moscona from ESPN Radio in New Orleans and Baton Rouge just a few nights ago, talking up the LSU Tigers. We posted a video tonight talking about the new LSU offense with Miles Brennan at quarterback and Steve Ensminger taking over from Matt Canada now at Maryland to run the offense for Ed Ogeron. Alabama talk on a regular basis. Clemson, we said Ohio State needed to have Steve Days with Michigan on tonight. We missed connections, unfortunately, but Steve Days of the Michigan podcast, a regular here on Mark Rogers TV. Tony Siracusa last night with UCLA. Mike Regalado coming up tomorrow to talk Bruins. Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football, and really the list goes on. So just check out the videos. If you've come across my YouTube channel in the past but have yet to subscribe, please do. We love to debate and discuss college football, and we want your comments and suggestions and your questions, suggestions about content, about anything. We love the discussion. And one that we've served up in recent weeks, as I will dial up the chat here in just a second, is the best win for your particular program, the best win in history, the best win since you've been a fan, the worst loss, the most crushing loss, most devastating loss for you, for the program during your time as a college football fan, your favorite player, the best player now and in the history of your program. Also, we've tossed out a best coach, favorite coach. If you can't watch the videos, or it's more convenient for you to just check out the audio, please do that at Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search Mark Rogers TV. Let's go to the chat. Our aim tonight is to run down weeks 1 and 2 for the 2018 season and see what we've got in terms of some of the best matchups in college football for the first 2 weeks of the season as I crank up the live chat. You've possibly also seen that this week we started our conference comparisons, and we love to do that. All right, we've got Phil on the line, takes on new defensive line coach Jess Simpson. As somebody pointed out to me the other day, that's not that Jessica Simpson. Of course, it's Jess Simpson. And if anybody has any insight into Jess Simpson's background and his experience and what he brings to the table, let me have it. Otherwise, I will bring on my Miami connections to do the heavy lifting on Jess Simpson's qualifications. We had Alonzo Oliver from the U family on this week to talk Miami football. Some of those videos are posted, but I still have some content to post from that conversation and the much ballyhooed quarterback battle between Jaron Williams, N'Kosi Perry, and Malik Rozier. Also, Isaiah Kim Martinez, he's from the Miami Hurricane. He joined us as well to talk Miami football. Also had on Antoine Staley, who does his work with Athlon Sports, to talk about the U. I was in the middle of letting you know that the audio can be found at Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search Mark Rogers TV. And our conference rankings, I'm not getting a whole lot of views on that. I get a lot of great feedback that people like the conference ratings and rankings, but I'm not getting a ton of views on those. So let me know if you find that interesting at all. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back about 5 to 10 videos and you'll find the video that I released on my formula for not rating the conferences for 2017, but basically rating the performance of the conferences against each other within the Power Five. That's what it all comes down to. I've knocked out the introductory video in which I let everybody know how the system works. And then we looked at the Pac-12 that went 8-9 against the other 4 conferences, the Big 12 that went 8-8, and then you've got the ACC that went a disappointing 11-18 against the other conferences. But what do the wins mean, and what do the losses mean? All right, I know it's late. I know a lot of you that would be watching otherwise have to get ready for work tomorrow. So you're tucked away as you should be, with the alarm set for 6 or 6:30 tomorrow morning. My day off is Friday, my first day off of 2. Friday and Saturday are my days off. So, and just about any other night, even if I do have to work tomorrow, I'm up at this hour anyway. I love the late nights. And I've been working on college football tonight with more video content coming on the channel tonight. I wanted to look at week 1 of the college football season and see the matchups that we've got in store. Please, whatever you've got regarding college football or anything else, even the NFL. I was watching a ton of NFL documentaries tonight while I was working, and also last night. The Ice Bowl, the 91 Falcons, this all on the NFL Network. The Brett Favre return to Green Bay. What else were they showing that was fascinating? The best show on turf. All that stuff. I love the NFL. All right, week 1 on that Thursday night is Northwestern at Purdue. Justin Jackson gone from Northwestern, one of the more prolific runners in the history of the Big Ten and the most productive and prolific back in the history of Northwestern football. He's gone, and we will preview who's going to replace these stars. We've done that in past off seasons. Let you know, okay, Justin Jackson is gone from Northwestern. Who's going to replace him? And we'll get to that in the coming months. Clayton Thorson, his health in doubt following the bowl game injury against Kentucky. Northwestern at Purdue. Of course, Jeff Brom doing an outstanding job with the Boilers in year 1, going 7-6. 4-5 in the Big Ten's got to be their best finish in close to 10 years. Wake Forest to Tulane. What about those Demon Deacons coming off an 8-5 campaign, putting up 55 points on Texas A&M in the bowl game, the Belk Bowl? And I could not believe what I was watching, and watching Wake Forest football in postseason play, the way they could sling it around and put up an aerial circus in that game. But John Walford, 4-year starter for the most part, 4-year starter, gone. So they've got to replace him. So like Justin Jackson with Northwestern, that will be another highlight of our off-season coverage. We'll be talking about the Wake Forest quarterback position replacing John Walford, one of the best quarterbacks in the history of the school. Wake at Tulane in week 1. Utah State, Matt Wells having some issues with Utah State the last couple of years after a big start to his career at Utah State as the head coach, his alma mater. At Michigan State, and Brian Lewerke and the Spartans coming off that big bowl win against Washington State to conclude a 10-3 campaign. I await your comments and anything you've got for me tonight. San Diego State at Stanford, of course. San Diego State won that game against the Cardinal at home last season. The Cardinal looking for some payback against the group of 5 opponent with no Donnell Pumphrey. No KJ Costello in spring camp for Stanford. They're going to hold him out. He's hurt. He should be back for the regular season, but no KJ Costello for spring practice. And of course, one of the biggest returnee news makers in terms of making the announcement, the decision coming back this season is Bryce Love of Stanford. App State at Penn State, sneaky good game. Taylor Lamb moves on at quarterback for App State. Longtime starter there at App State. Great all-time quarterback at that school. Going to Happy Valley to take on the Saquon Barkley-less Penn State Nittany Lions, who also lost Deshaun Hamilton, their all-time leading receiver, Marcus Allen, their leader on defense, Trace McSorley, of course, at the helm for Penn State as they look to win a Big Ten championship. Army at Duke, sneaky good game in week 1. Of course, the Blue Devils finished with a win in a bowl game against Northern Illinois, the Motor City Bowl, to finish 7-6. Army had a nice season at 10-3. They knocked off Duke. They played Wake. Was it Wake? Very tough. They even played Ohio State. It was 38-7, but they played well in that game. And they beat San Diego State in the Poinsettia Bowl. Army beat Duke last year, 21-16, coming off 10-3 season, taking on Duke on the road in week 1. Other week 1 matchups, BYU at Arizona, the Cougars 3-9. Where is this program headed under Coach Sataki? Kevin Sumlin, of course, has the pleasure and the privilege of coaching one Khalil Tate, who will start his Heisman campaign against that BYU defense at home in week 1. Oregon State, Ohio State at the Shoe. Jonathan Smith in his coaching debut at Oregon State with Mike Riley on the sidelines with him. Of course, a fired Nebraska coach who's coming back to Oregon State for the 3rd time. And you've got Ohio State with Dwayne Haskins taking over, most likely at quarterback. I think I'm having some issues streaming. Let me know if my video feed is breaking up at all. I'm watching the return over here to try to catch any comments that come down from you to answer those and respond to those. All right. In week 1, what else do we have? Week 1 matchup with Texas taking on Maryland. We know what happened to Tom Herman in his debut in Austin last year. 51 points against the Horns, as there were all sorts of special teams and defensive touchdowns in that game for the Terps. But they did not make a bowl game. They got off to the fast start. They were 3-0 at one point, got shellacked by Central Florida, and Maryland did not make a bowl game. And, of course, Texas rebounded from that embarrassing home opening loss to Maryland to finish strong, beat Mizzou in a bowl game 33-16. Sam Ehlinger and Shane Buechele will battle it out, I'm sure, even into August for the starting job for the Longhorns at quarterback. Bama at Louisville would have been much more interesting with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. The Tide will be a substantial favorite with, we would assume, Tua Tagovailoa at a quarterback over Jalen Hurts for Bama. Auburn at Washington, probably the premier matchup of at least the Saturday games earlier in the day. In week 1, Washington has all of its main skill position players back, minus Dante Pettis, with another year from, of course, Browning at quarterback. Jake Browning with a tremendous statistical year, the year that they went to the playoffs 2 years ago. They relied more on Coleman and Gaskin running the ball and not so much a passing team for the Huskies and Chris Peterson last year. But they take on the Auburn Tigers with a new quarterback replacing Jared Stidham this year. Ole Miss at Texas Tech could be an entertaining game in week 1 as Matt Luke continues the reclamation job in Oxford. Tennessee, West Virginia, an ACC-SEC matchup in week 1 year ago. Of course, it was Quentin Dormady and the Vols pulling out an improbable game against Georgia Tech, one in which they were dominated most of the night in winning 42-41 in overtime. And to round out that Saturday of week 1, Michigan at Notre Dame. Of course, Jim Harbaugh, the shine is off after an 8-5 campaign and a bowl loss and not beating anyone of significance. Purdue was probably the best win. It was the best win. Shane Patterson, will he be the quarterback? Shea Patterson, former Rebel. We will find out that either later this month of March or into April. The NCAA will make its ruling. Otherwise, it will most likely be another season of Brandon Peters as he develops a quarterback for the Wolverines. Brandon Wimbush, just a 49% passer, needs to become more polished as a thrower of the football if he is to lead Notre Dame to college football playoff contention, and if he's to keep his job. Otherwise, Ian Book, who was awful in relief of Wimbush against Miami in that embarrassing loss at Hard Rock, Ian Book did play well down the stretch and, of course, led the game-winning drive and the touchdown pass against LSU to win the Capital One Bowl or the Citrus Bowl. Miami, LSU, Michigan, Notre Dame. Those are the two games of week 1. Michigan and Notre Dame. That's in South Bend. Miami, LSU, neutral site game. Miles Brennan, a quarterback most likely, with Noel Narcissi getting some packages for LSU. And, of course, Steve Ensminger, the new offensive coordinator for the Bayou Bengals, trying to resurrect that offense with new quarterback, new running back, new offensive coordinator for LSU, and a ton lost on defense. And they're hurting at cornerback, of all places, are the Tigers. Matt Moscona joined us from ESPN Baton Rouge in Louisiana just a couple days ago. And we have yet to release some of those segments, but we have released his take on recruiting at LSU and the offense under Steve Ensminger. So join that video. Matt does a great job. He's all over LSU football, and we have a fun time talking LSU football. All right, week 2 matchups, and I hope I'm not missing any comments here, but nothing's coming through, and I get it. It's 1 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday night, Friday morning, but if you've got anything for me, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to preview week 1, which I just did, and now week 2 of the 2018 season. And if you love college football, and if you're watching me at 1 o'clock in the morning, you love college football, check out the conference ratings and rankings. I'm done with the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC, and I've got an explanation video to introduce the system. So check out those videos and let me know what you think. I will be knocking out the Big 10 or the SEC tomorrow and the other conference, the final of the Power 5 conferences, on Saturday. Yeah. Week 2, Friday night, TCU at SMU. Probably won't be a competitive game, but it is Sonny Dykes' regular season debut. He did coach the bowl game after being fired by Cal, being without a job, coming to SMU as head coach. Sonny Dykes and TCU. That's a Friday night matchup on week 2. Memphis and Navy, always one of the more important matchups in the American Conference, as we have Ryan jumping on Georgia at South Carolina in week 2. Yeah, we're getting there. And what else do we have? Never too late for college football. Go Canes. Boy, do I have the Miami contingent out there. I don't know what happened. I think it was all that Cam Underwood bringing his folks from over on State of the U. So we appreciate Cam for doing that. One of the Dogs' harder games at South Carolina could be, should be. And we'll get to it in just a second. Before that, we've got Kentucky at Florida. Dan Mullen, of course, making his SEC debut at Florida as head coach. Kentucky doesn't know who they're going to play at quarterback. We had a conversation with Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football a few weeks ago about the Kentucky quarterback situation. And if you're unaware, they will start a quarterback this season, most likely the JUCO transfer. Can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they do not have a quarterback on roster, does Kentucky, that is thrown an FBS pass. Mississippi State at Kansas State, a sneaky good one in week 2. Bulldogs coming off that 9-4 campaign. Nick Fitzgerald, we wish him all the best coming back from his injury against Ole Miss. And of course, Joe Moorhead makes the transition from offensive coordinator at Penn State to Mississippi State. George jumping on Gators all over the place. Here's your game, Ryan. Georgia at South Carolina. So, of course, the Bulldogs are the class of the SEC Eastern Division, and I would argue that they are the team that has the biggest advantage, biggest gap after them than any division leader in college football. So think Pac-12 North. Who are the teams? They're Stanford, Washington, Oregon. Toss-up. Washington's probably the best team heading into 2018. Pac-12 South. USC's got the best roster. They're the best team. New quarterback, though. They could be challenged by the likes of Arizona State, UCLA, Utah. Big 12, no divisions. SEC Western Division, yes, Alabama might have the most gap there with Auburn and some turnover that they have. LSU not proving anything and breaking in a new quarterback as well, and Texas A&M needing to get its footing under Jimbo Fisher. So that could be argued that Alabama is the best team in that division with the biggest gap for the second place team. Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State obviously battling it out. Wisconsin with a decided advantage in the West, but Iowa, I expect with Nathan Stanley at quarterback to challenge this year. Clemson, Florida State should come back and give them a run, I would think, to a certain extent. In Miami, the best team in the Coastal, but I think Georgia is clearly the best team that has a decided advantage against the rest of the division. But if there is a team, as Ryan points out, that could challenge Georgia this season, long-term, it's Dan Mullen in Florida, I believe. But Will Muschamp is doing a great job. Oh, man, if Dan Mullen blows the streak in his first year, the Gator faithful will be in a something. We'll be in a flurry, a fury. So we talked about the South Carolina job and the job that Will Muschamp's doing in Columbia with Peter Burns this week. And so I will release that soon. I had a conversation with Peter Burns last weekend. We went through as many spring situations as we could. I haven't released the South Carolina decision or conversation yet, but Peter Burns said this about South Carolina and Will Muschamp. He said, if I had a kid playing football and the football aside, not selecting the best school to play football and win championships, but the guy to play for, Peter Burns said Will Muschamp would be his guy. Kentucky, Florida. Yeah, I'm with you, Ryan. Kentucky and Florida. Florida hasn't lost to Kentucky since, I think, 1984 is the year that comes to mind. I believe it's 1984. It's been forever, and they should have won last year. They had a crazy catch near the end. They had a penalty that decided that game, and this time it's back at the Swamp, so it's going to be difficult for the Wildcats to go down there and win, but they had a great shot at it last year. How about Texas A&M hosting Clemson? Jimbo Fisher gets another look at Clemson and his old nemesis, Dabo Swinney, this time as Texas A&M head coach, and he probably doesn't have the team. But with what we saw late in the season, specifically against Alabama, and I know it's the Alabama defense, but what we saw out of the Clemson offense and the limitations they had throwing, maybe they go to Texas A&M, night game, Kyle Field, and maybe Jimbo's got a shot. I think he's got a shot. George says, don't worry, Florida will skate past Kentucky. They always do. George, I don't know if it's going to be in 2018. I don't know if it's going to be in 2025 or when it's going to be, but Kentucky will win. Kentucky will win. And for these 34 years, of course, Florida's been better almost every year. And for the years that they haven't been better, they've been just as good. So this streak is odd. It's improbable. But considering the two programs and where they've been since 1984, it's not that incredible. Florida's just been flat out better. Except for, of course, this past year at 4-7 versus Kentucky winning 7. I'm hoping Jimbo Fisher is the biggest flop in the history of football starting right now. What you got against Jimbo Fisher? Okay, I'll stop right there. Jimbo Fisher, Florida State. Okay, he's no longer with Florida State, George. George, big Florida fan, loves the Gators. What do we got? Week 2, Clemson, Texas A&M. Will Kelly Bryant win the job again and hold off 2 5-stars in Dexter Lawrence and Hunter Johnson? A lot of people there at Clemson would love to see Hunter Johnson win the job. I don't want to put too much stock in what we saw from Kelly Bryant against Alabama. That's a tough go against that defense. Remember what Florida State did with DeAndre Francois at quarterback in week 1? They couldn't block up front. Francois had no chance, and they had 7 points on the board. George says, if you were ever going to beat Florida and your name is Kentucky, you should have done it already. It's just going to get worse now. It might. Dan Mullen's in place. Florida's going to recruit better than Kentucky. Mark Stoops has probably maxed out Kentucky's recruiting efforts, finishing in the top 25 the past few years, and that's got to be as good as it gets for Kentucky. They're in a tough spot because it's difficult for them to get into the Deep South and get those players, so they go to Ohio, they go to West Virginia. They got their best recruit from Michigan this past offseason. Arizona at Houston. Guys think anything about that? Of course, it's Khalil Tate and Kevin Sumlin together. We will see if Kevin Sumlin and his offensive mind can help Khalil Tate become a little bit more polished without restricting him and his immense talent. Arizona at Houston. The Cougars last year defeated Arizona State out of the Pac-12. Arizona State, or I should say Houston, really loading up on Pac-12 schools in the scheduling. As Ryan says, I am impressed with what Mark Stoops is doing with that program, though at least they're getting to bowl games now. And probably should have won that bowl game against Northwestern. Interesting, sneaky good week 2 matchup in Tempe. Arizona State hosting Michigan State. Michigan State, a lot of people love this year with Brian Lewerke coming back at quarterback. 20 returning starters for a team that beat Penn State, beat Michigan, lost decidedly to Notre Dame, lost to Northwestern in overtime, a really good team, obliterated by Ohio State, but then they finished off Washington State and finished in the top 15 in the country. Michigan State this year. UCLA at Oklahoma. Of course, the Bruins are going to be breaking in a new quarterback, and Bruins fans hopes that that's the 4-star, the high 4-star Dorian Robinson Thompson. I'll have to get that straight. It's one or the other. But it might be the veteran that's coming back for them. UCLA at Oklahoma week 2. Kyler Murray in play for the Sooners. New quarterbacks all over the place. Sounds like a video I'm going to have to cut. Talking about new quarterbacks. Colorado at Nebraska. Scott Frost, his first Power 5 matchup with the Buffs in town. I really like Arizona State's quarterback. I forget his name, though. Something Manning. Manny Wilkins, good quarterback. He's back with Herm Edwards and company. Arizona State, surprisingly, got off the deck to finish 6-3 in the Pac-12. weak division, but still 6-3, 7-6 after they got blown out by NC State in whatever bowl game they played, the Sun Bowl. USC at Stanford. The Cardinal had beaten the Trojans 5 straight, but USC came back and dominated the game at home at the Coliseum last year. Looked really good, played their best game by far of the season. USC's most complete game, both sides of the ball, dominated in the run game, stopped Bryce Love, shut him down, held him in check, let's say, and just Ronald Jones had a great game. Stephen Carr had an exceptional game, and he's going to be the guy. Keely Uri. She made the comment to me that people always screw up her first name, and I never thought I would do it, but I did it. But Keely Uri, who writes for 247 Sports USC site, uscfootball.com, we had her on. She talked about her article on Stephen Carr and what he's going to have to do to replace Ronald Jones with a new offense, with a new quarterback in play, of course. Whether that's going to be JT Daniels or Jack Sears or Matt Fink. All right, week 2, Virginia at Indiana. For some reason, this is like Duke and Northwestern. They keep playing each other. They have no reasonable connection, these two schools, Virginia and Indiana. And instead of playing a home and home, they're playing 3 consecutive years at least. So they've played the last 2 years. Indiana won last year, 34-17. 2 years ago, Virginia won in Bloomington, but they're playing again in Bloomington. And Duke and Northwestern doing the same thing. They're playing a 3rd straight year. George says, is there a West Coast team that could win the national championship as a dark horse? So, based on name brand and the talent that's been recruited there, I would not consider USC to be a dark horse, but based on the positioning of their team for 2018, they are a dark horse. This team doesn't look to me like they're prepared and ready to challenge the likes of Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, and those teams for a national playoff spot. What if they win the Pac-12 and they've got Texas on the road, they've got Notre Dame at home? If they can win one of those two, sweep the Pac-12, have some combination of a Pac-12 championship and one loss, USC is going to get its shot. But unless this new quarterback, JT Daniels, or one of the other new quarterbacks, either Finks or Sears, is better than I expect, USC not ready for that competition this year. They're a top 15 club, but they are not a top 5 team in my estimation. I think we're going to see, and this is without Ronald Jones and Sam Darnold and Deontay Burnett, although the wide receiver position at USC is loaded, led by Tyler Vaughns and Michael Pittman, that USC is going to be really good this year, but they're not in that class. This is not going to be the season for USC. And if they do make the college football playoff, it could be one of these early and ugly exits. Ryan, programs that have been the worst schedule with the new head coaches, the worst schedules, meaning the toughest schedules. Tennessee's got to play West Virginia. Nebraska's got Colorado. And I believe Nebraska has an extremely difficult go against the Big Ten Eastern Division. They've got Ohio State. I don't know. I don't have the schedule off the top of my head, but I think they've loaded up on the best teams in the Big Ten Eastern Division for Nebraska. You're right. Tennessee, of course, has to play Alabama. They've got West Virginia. They've got Georgia, South Carolina, etc. I don't know who their other team out of the Western Division is. Of course, they played LSU last year. George, after I moved to the West Coast, I had hope in Oregon, the whole Pac-12. I wish they could put up a challenge. I don't know what the problem is. They have all those Samoan players. They do. I talked to a Virginia blogger just the other day, and because of Bronco Mendenhall's connection and recruiting footprint and the relationships that he has built, expect a lot of Samoans to go to Virginia. Of course, Bronco Mendenhall at BYU recruited and signed a ton of Samoan players. Welcome to the College Football Playoff Top 10 Club. Oh, the National Championship Club. Sorry, West Coast teams not allowed. Doesn't appear that way, does it? Tennessee has to play at Auburn. So, yeah, Ryan, there you go. You laid it out there for me. What more can I say? Tennessee's got Alabama and Auburn, and they've got Georgia and South Carolina. Yeah. Don't judge Jeremy Pruitt on this year. I feel sorry for Tennessee because they're so close to being a little bit better than they are. Are they really? So Tennessee goes what, 2-6 in the SEC this year? I think that would be an accomplishment. They get blown out by Alabama and Auburn. They have a road game against South Carolina. Of course, they can't beat Georgia, we don't think. Then if they could win 2 games out of their games against Vandy, Kentucky, Missouri. Yeah, 2-6 is an accomplishment for Tennessee. Let's say they lose to West Virginia. They win the other games. They go 5-7. It's possible. All right. Elsewhere in week 2, we've got the Iowa State-Iowa game, which is suddenly interesting. They did play a great game in Ames last year. The Hawkeyes won it in overtime, 44-41. Nathan Stanley back at quarterback after throwing, I believe, 26 touchdowns and 7 interceptions for Iowa in the huge game against Ohio State. And they at least finished strong after they had a slump after the Buckeyes win, after that big 55-24 game. They got blasted by Wisconsin, and they lost to Northwestern. They lost to Purdue when we didn't think Purdue was very good. And then Iowa finished off Nebraska. They crushed them, and then they beat Boston College. And I think they could be set up to challenge Wisconsin. Michigan, Notre Dame, yeah, it's coming up. Iowa State, easy with, of course, Kyle Kempt back at quarterback. We first saw him against Oklahoma, pulling off the big upset against the Sooners, 38-31. That put the Cyclones on the map and let us all know Matt Campbell's doing a nice job there. And then they beat TCU. And then they faded down the stretch, but then they came back and impressively beat Memphis, a good Memphis team that was ranked in the top 25 in the bowl win in the Liberty Bowl. So good for Iowa State. George is laughing at something. I don't know what it is. All right. Duke at Northwestern, one of the upsets of last season. And we talked about Northwestern's style of play and their level of athlete, that this happens to them if they don't have everything running in sync, if they're not technically and fundamentally sound, and if they make mistakes. Even the good Northwestern teams don't have that type of top-end talent, and they showed it. I remember watching this game. I was locked in on a noon kickoff from Duke with Northwestern in town. I thought it was going to be a really good game, and Duke blew them off the field. But Ray says Northwestern easy this year, and it might be. But Duke finished 7-6. They won the bowl game against Northern Illinois, and we get another year of Daniel Jones at quarterback. He needs to play better and more consistently. He was basically a TD to interception even ratio last year, and he's got to play better. Northwestern has a tough schedule. I believe they do. I was looking at this. We were looking at this, I think, just a few weeks ago, looking at the Big Ten schedules. Northwestern, I think, it's hammered with at least 2 of the toughies out of the Big Ten East. Michigan, Michigan State, maybe Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State. George, as much as I cheer for the Gators, I hope that Jimbo Fisher loses that Notre Dame losses and that Penn State loses to. There's always a game on for me. There's always a game on for me, too, because I'll watch anybody play. So Duke won that game at home against Northwestern, and then the Wildcats still finished 10-3. Georgia Tech, South Florida. So if you remember correctly, because of Hurricane Irma, Georgia Tech missed its game against Central Florida. That would have been just good to see Central Florida play another Power Five, not a really, really good team with Georgia Tech, but it cost Georgia Tech the opportunity to become bowl eligible since they went 5-6, and we didn't get to see that game. And of course, South Florida's got to replace Quentin Flowers. So there's another quarterback situation that we've got to outline here on Mark Rogers TV. Quentin Flowers gone in South Florida. Who do they have coming back? And Charlie Strong did a nice job with the Bulls last season. Penn State at Pitt. They're playing for a third consecutive season. And I like this game. And it's good for college football. And back in my day, way back in the day for me, it was Dan Marino and Todd Blackledge and those guys. And it was a really good, at that point, independent game. Neither one was in a conference. And Pitt and Penn State was huge. And they played at the end of the season then. Of course, they can't do that now. But Penn State, they have reached the cutting edge, the periphery of the elite of college football. It's time to get serious about scheduling again. If anybody has a chance and you want to look up the future Penn State schedules, I would like to know they have to be scheduling better than what they've had the last few years. And think about how much has changed with Penn State since the last time they visited Heinz Field. That was just 2 years ago in 2016, so less than 2 years ago. Early 2016, Trace McSorley at quarterback. The only meaningful minutes we had seen him play was in the previous Tax Slayer Bowl against Georgia. So think about how fast college football changes. It's the end of 2016, and Georgia's not that good. And they've got Jacob Eason at quarterback. Actually, they didn't. That was the season before. That was 2015. End of 2015, Trace McSorley replaces an injured Christian Hackenberg against Georgia, plays well, throws 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, but they lose to Georgia. And then they start the next season. They lose, of course, the next week to Michigan, blown out at the Big House, but they lost to Pitt. So we're only a year and a few months removed from Pitt beating Penn State at Heinz Field, being the better team, us knowing nothing about what was on the horizon for Penn State football, as they then ran the table, went to the Rose Bowl, won the Big Ten championship, and then did what they did this year in winning another, well, they didn't win the Rose Bowl, but they won New Year's Six game this time around. Ryan says if the elite programs are all in a house, then Penn State is looking up from outside the window. They are right now. Best quarterbacks come from Western Pennsylvania. All-time, Ray? That's very true. We know Johnny Unitas, Joe Montana, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino. Recently, what do you got for me? Penn State at Pitt. Kenny Pickett, the last time we saw him on the field for Pitt, he was playing a nice ball game against Miami, pulling off that upset on the Friday after Thanksgiving. So Pitt has something to look for here in 2018 as well. All right. So I've gone through the week 1 and week 2 matchups, and there's, as always, more games than I will be able to watch, but I'll want to watch all of them. Harbaugh and Meyer guarantee Penn State ain't going nowhere. I wouldn't be so sure. Penn State just brought in a top 5 recruiting class. Trace McSorley's on the field. They lost some tight end and wide receiver talent with Deshaun Hamilton and Mike Gesicki, but those guys are being replaced. The offensive line is going to be better. That's been the sore spot for this team, has been the offensive line. And I know Saquon Barkley cannot be replaced in terms of what he did in the kick game, the receiving game, as well as the rushing game. But Miles Sanders is more than a capable back, and even more highly touted coming out of high school than Saquon Barkley. All right. What else can we kick around? I went through week 1 and week 2. Uh, what can we do here on the channel that's going to make it better? I do have some thoughts and some ideas of how I'm going to change things in the next several weeks. I'm not going to get into that right now because I don't want to just brainstorm and let you know uh, until I decide and know exactly what I'm going to do. But we're going to try to improve things and maybe streamline things just a bit. I think sometimes I hurt myself and the channel by, if this is possible, producing too much content. I am throwing videos at you guys every couple hours, and I've got so much backed up, backlogged to throw out there. It's ridiculous. So I'm going to have a little bit more streamlined content. They produce some good quarterbacks, best and worst case scenarios for some teams. That is a good one right there. Best and worst scenarios. So what am I looking at? So I'm going to finish up my college football conference rankings and ratings. I just have the SEC and the Big Ten to do. I want to give you my top 25. I would like to give you a playoff system. I've got 2 playoff systems in mind, and I'll explain why I came up with 2. And everybody does playoff systems and way too early top 25s, I know, but I'm going to throw those out there. The thing that I don't hear anybody else doing is revising the this is the slow time for college football, Ray, but this is the best time this time and then way after spring practice, like in May and June, to work through some of these other discussions like best conference, rating the conferences, rating each position, uh, looking at a playoff system, looking at scheduling formulas. So those are the things I'm going to attack. I'm also going to do what I've done the last few years, and since a lot of you guys have let me know that you just started watching in the last 6 months, maybe you're not familiar with some of the series that I've done in the past. But for example, I've thrown up the ACC versus the SEC or any Power 5 versus Power 5. I seeded the teams, and then I took a guess or an estimate on who would win a 10-game series and what that would be. Do you follow that? So my thinking there is that if you say, okay, USC is the 1 seed in the Pac-12 and Oklahoma is the 1 seed in the Big 12, and we're going to try to rank the conferences in another way, just look at the seedings and look at what the matchups would be and who would win these matchups. Well, sometimes it's a tough call. It's a nail biter. So sometimes it's best to say, who would win a 10-game series? Would it be 5-5 or 6-4? Would it be 9-1? So you guys would have to see it play out, I think. I just think it's an interesting discussion. If you became a homer for the Gators, you would probably take over the whole logo. That's $1 billion program. Ray hates the AP poll. So, Ray, if you caught any of my Sunday postings from last season, what I would do, and some of you may have seen this, is I would wait until the AP poll came out, and then I would look at all the inconsistencies and all the illogical rankings. For example, and this is just an example that doesn't necessarily is not reality, but just an example. Like Michigan State just beat Michigan, and they're both 5-1, and they would still have Michigan rated ahead of Michigan State. Well, they lost the head-to-head, and they've got the same record. So why would Michigan be ahead of Michigan State still? Just I would see things like that every week, and so I started cutting a video after the AP poll release every Sunday that was just basically, I forget what I started to call it. It was something to the effect of uh, the the top 25 poll makes no sense. Something like that makes complete nonsense or whatever I named it. And then I would release my poll. Yeah, it is a nightmare. What's funny, and it shows how inconsistent the poll is that it's very inconsistent and doesn't make sense. You have teams ranked ahead of other teams that they lost to, and even if they don't have a better record, you can tell how the preseason poll plays into the poll rankings even 3 and 4 weeks deep into the season. But once the playoff committee gets involved and releases their poll, they have such an effect on the way the AP writers vote. It's crazy. They suddenly almost lock in with the college football playoff committee selections. Even though they're not released until Tuesday, they kind of start to see the logic. And if you've listened to me for a few years, you know that I don't believe the college football playoff committee got it right this past off season. I'm not going to get into that, nor did they get it right in 2016, because I believe Penn State, as winner of the Big Ten, should have been in the playoff. But I think they at least logically look at it, and they at least come to logical conclusions, even if I disagree with them. Yeah, it is based on the preseason poll. Ohio State was a good example of that early in the season. Now, Ohio State, once they played out the entire season and beat the teams that they beat, including Wisconsin and Michigan and USC at the end, and finished 12-2. Sure, they were the 5th-ranked team in the country. I think that was legit at the end. But they were, number 2? And they got taken apart by Oklahoma at home, and they only dropped to like 9. And then they beat some bad teams, and they were up to number 5 or 6 before they played Penn State. It was totally based on preseason. My top 25 looks crazy early in the season, and I hope people understand this, and I try to explain it, because let's say, for example, Maryland beat Texas in week 1. South Carolina, when nobody thought they were any good, they beat North Carolina State in week 1. I ranked those teams fairly high because they actually beat a good opponent, and they were 1 or 2-0 at the time. Now, I clearly let people know it's not that I think Maryland's the 15th best team in the country, but right now they're 2-0 and they beat Texas. So they have a better resume than, let's say, Ohio State, who lost to Oklahoma and beat Indiana. I rank the teams based on what they've accomplished to date. I don't try to predict or project or keep a team elevated just because I think they're good. If they're truly that good, I have to knock them down after they lose, especially if they lose to a bad team or in an embarrassing way. And if they're truly better than that, good enough, they'll make their way back up the poll. Who do you think the standout group of 5 team will be this season? So, of course, it was Central Florida last year, but they lose Scott Frost and almost the entire coaching staff. They do have Milton back at quarterback. We know that. They lose the outstanding outside linebacker, Griffin, who will be in the NFL Combine tomorrow. So I've got to think that Central Florida roster is compromised, and the coaching of Scott Frost, it's going to be difficult to... We'll see what Josh Heupel has, but I would think Central Florida is going to be good, but not to that degree. Navy's always in the running. Memphis is in a good place. Boise State's always tough. Of course, they finished off their year with a win over Oregon. It's going to take some analysis. I'm just talking off the top of my head and picking out the usual cast of characters. Houston was pretty tough last year. They did disappoint me in the bowl game against Fresno State. Talk about a team that really surprised last year. Fresno State got off the deck from the year before and played Boise State in the Mountain West Championship game after they beat them the week before. Those are the teams that come to mind. Of course, Charlie Strong in South Florida do as well. So I used to have some really good group of 5 contributors to have on, and I need to flag some of those people down. Lots to talk about. So, Ray, I know it's the slow season, but we've got so much to work through here. How long will Charlie Strong be at USF and Lane Kiffin be at FAU? Based on last year's results and their reputations. And based on what Lane Kiffin showed us at FAU last year, I would say that he's going to be the first one to move on. Just a guess. George says, I'm not even worried about this season. I just want to beat Miami in the opening game next year. Oh, George, 2018, lock in. We're barely in March, and we've got to look forward to 2018, 2019. Forget it. We don't know what's going to be going on in 2019. Not taking into account the backroom deals and what the referees do, we're just pretending that it's all legitimate, and that's okay. Oklahoma plays UCLA. I mentioned that. I may have brushed right through it, but UCLA at Oklahoma. I did talk about the quarterback situation at UCLA. Their stud quarterback, Dorian Robinson-Thompson, or Thompson-Robinson, is not an early enrollee, so we're not going to see him in spring practice, but he's expected to own the job in August. We'll see if he's able to catch up. Yes, Ray, it should be a great year ahead. Just in the first 2 weeks of the season, I see a zillion games I want to watch and a lot that I want to get to. So, yeah, all sorts of content ideas that I have that I've done in previous off seasons, and I keep a running list, and I will try to get to as many as possible. But you are going to see some changes on the channel, hopefully for the better. I know that some things are going to cause us to produce a little bit less content, but hopefully it's a little bit more streamlined. Unfortunately, though I love to talk to guys from the likes of Syracuse and Virginia and Arkansas, we just don't get the views with them. And it's not like I'm going to completely miss and ignore those programs, because I can't, because I want to bring in as many contributors as possible, and I want to be able to establish those fan bases like I have with Miami and USC and Ohio State and some others. Did I miss the Michigan Notre Dame pick? I don't make picks in March. If I had to guess that one right now, I'm going to take Notre Dame at home. But I want to know if Shea Patterson's going to be the quarterback at Michigan. I think Michigan has a slightly better roster than Notre Dame, slightly. But boy, that's a pick'em game. All right. I got to get some sleep. Of course you do. Ryan, we'll see you next time. Everybody else, I think we will wrap it up. I don't have a whole lot of other, I could ramble and rant about college football all night, as you guys could as well. Ryan, we appreciate you jumping on board. As I've mentioned to you guys in the past, I will do my best to clear up a few things and get some notifications out to you before I do these live streams in the future, so you guys know what's going on and can plan for it. And so we appreciate it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you know any college football fans out there that have not found us yet, please let them know that we're around here at Mark Rogers TV. We'll see you guys next time. Appreciate you jumping on board. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you soon.